Hello, I'm Anawiltus, and today I'm going to be doing some experimental reviewing style where I will be reviewing a show by attempting to explain it to another individual. So, who do we have here with us today?
Oh, hi. It's
Uh,
been a while since I've been here, I guess.
yeah, would you introduce yourself?
Um, I Y'all know me as the Real Rap Media, I guess. Yeah, Dixon Griffey, small YouTube channel. Look me up.
All right, so the show I'm going to be explaining to you today is Star Trek, specifically the original series, as it is called, which aired from 1966 to 1969. If I'm not mistaken, that's actually quite before you were born, isn't it?
Oh yeah, man, it's a
Yeah.
good time.
Yeah, it's an interesting time. I think the Vietnam War was on back then, and definitely a different time when it comes to television, especially when we consider science fiction, which has changed a lot since then in how it is done.
Yeah, I've always been more of a Star Wars man myself.
Hmm. Yeah,
Never
that's a
watched Star Trek.
classic rivalry there. But I'm going to explain to you what the series is all about. Now, for those of
Okay.
you who aren't sure exactly what I'm talking about, just as a distinguisher, when I say Star Trek here, I'm not going to be speaking about the 1965 pilot episode. That's going to be a separate review because I consider that to be a different production since a lot of things changed between that one and the actual main series. And I'm also not talking about the motion picture uh, or the reboot series or any of the other series. I'm specifically talking about the original series, or some people abbreviate it as TOS. All right, so do you actually know anything about what Star Trek is about?
I have no idea.
No idea? Uh,
No, all I know is what's on the Big Bang Theory. That's what I know about
okay.
Star Trek.
Yeah, that may be flattering or unflattering depending on your perspective on that show.
Uh, eh,
But so of course, as the title implies, there is a Star Trek, or to be more exact, a trek through the stars. So that implies that the main characters are, of course, going on a journey, interstellar, in an interstellar manner, between different star systems and different planets. And to be more exact, they're doing this in a spaceship.
okay.
Okay, so
Sounds interesting.
yeah, and the all the characters are part of an organization called Starfleet, which is sending the spaceship out, and the name of the spaceship is the USS Enterprise, and
I know
that
that much.
space, yep, and
I
that's
know that.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
a very iconic, and that spaceship is being sent out in order to explore different planets and to encounter alien civilizations and to go where no man has gone before, where no one has gone before. I'm sorry, and in addition to that, they occasionally enter into some political drama as well, occasionally interstellar politics. Sometimes they encounter some really weird aliens, and oftentimes they'll encounter some aliens that have some weird godlike powers that they're that happens quite frequently throughout the series. They encounter some super powerful aliens. So, do you have any questions so far?
So a group of people are going through the galaxy killing monsters.
No, that's not actually
Okay.
okay. It's good to clear
Okay.
that out. They're not going against all these aliens specifically to fight them. They're going in a mission of exploration. Now, sometimes that means that if they encounter some hostile aliens who aren't very nice, they'll end up having to fight them. Other times, the aliens aren't that nice and they end up reasoning with them. Other times the aliens are actually very nice and very friendly. So it's a bit of a mixed bag.
So they're just trying to explore. And
Yes, that's mainly what happens.
okay.
Okay, and the structure of the series is episodic, so there's no big plot line as we have in a lot of more recent science fiction series. There, instead, in the original Star Trek, each episode is a bit of a self contained story with a beginning, middle, and end. And usually at the end, there'll be some sort of philosophical lesson that is talked about by the main characters. So it does teach lessons in some ways. Not always, but sometimes it does. And it usually asks a question philosophically about society, maybe some social commentary. And oftentimes, in order to reach the point where that question is asked, the situations throughout the episodes will take some very interesting concepts and really explore them throughout the episode. Sometimes it doesn't succeed, sometimes it is pretty good.
Okay. So a lot of what I'm hearing is a lot of lessons are being learned while watching this show.
Sometimes.
Well, sometimes.
Yeah. Other
I,
times there's plenty of action, other times as well.
oh, so it's a combat lessons learned sometimes sci-fi TV show.
Uh, yeah, I guess that's one way to put it.
That's not particularly my cup of tea, but it sounds like
Yeah. I mean, it's not like one of those children's shows where they teach you a lesson. It's more when it comes to lessons, it's more philosophical questions and
yeah,
social commentary. So it's not simplistic necessarily.
yeah. Sounds like a show that would work nowadays. I guess you could say. Is there
Yeah.
a reboot of that show? Is that a thing now? Do they make new episodes?
No, they don't make new episodes of the old series, but there have been several sequel shows that have been made in the same universe established by the original show and following characters and sometimes having cameos of characters from the original show. That being said, there is actually an animated series with all of the original cast as voice actors that
Oh,
came out after the original series.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's a
Oh,
but a lot of people nowadays, there's a lot of fans that still watch the old episodes, and they also had a remastered edition where they went through all of the old episodes and they remastered it so that it's high quality, and they also exchanged some old scenes with CGI to give it a bit of a smoother look to it.
oh. So it's popular.
It is
It's a
very
popular show.
popular. Yeah,
It's very popular. Oh, I didn't know too much about this show until now.
yeah.
I all I knew was there was somebody named Scotty
Hmm.
and there was Spock.
Okay.
That's all I knew.
Okay. So let's talk about the characters then, since you brought that up.
Aha.
So the
Okay.
three most important characters when it comes to the show are Captain James T. Kirk, or James Kirk, or just Captain Kirk, who is the leader of the spaceship. He's the captain, just like the old Captain Cook, who was an explorer, if you've ever heard of him, or just a captain of a boat, but except it's a spaceship and they're on a mission of exploration, just like Captain Cook in the old days. If you know your history, I don't mean to presume.
I know nothing about history. I'm
Okay,
not really good with that.
okay. I'm sorry about that, but
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I knew who Captain Kirk was because, well, who doesn't? But
yeah. And
screw whoever.
there's also the first officer who is Mr. Spock, and he's a half human, half Vulcan, which is a type of alien. And he's also a science officer, so he knows a lot about science and usually will analyze situations from a scientific and from a logical perspective. And then there's also Dr. McCoy, who's the chief medical officer on the spaceship. And whenever there's a medical issue, like some strange alien disease or someone getting injured, he's always there to help. And the interplay between those three main characters, there's of course a lot of other characters as well, but the dialogue between those characters is, in my opinion, what the real strength of the show. Because Captain Kirk is a bit of a charismatic leader who can inspire his crew to action, and who also is very passionate about right and wrong. Although the actor William Shatner occasionally does overact, and that can lead to some pretty funny scenes when he's overacting, and it's pretty hilarious. But uh, Captain Kirk generally is a very interesting character. There's also, and Spock looks at everything from a logical perspective and tries to distance emotion from actualizing in his perspective, so that he can look at everything logically. And McCoy, on the other hand, is a bit of the opposite of Spock, and therefore thinks about the things he cares about and isn't afraid to look at his emotions, and always likes to have a bit of a mild rivalry with Spock, sort of a frenemy situation
Yeah.
where they're of course on the same crew, they're on the same team, and they of course work well together. But McCoy is often uh, annoyed at how Spock looks at situations logically without taking emotional looks at things, and that of course leads to some mild conflict there, which is very interesting when it is looked at.
So, is there a main villain in this, or is just different alien races trying to mess with them or something? Or is there like a main villain in all of this?
Well, as I was saying earlier, the series is very episodic, and there's no overarching plot arc overall, besides the fact that they're on a mission of exploration. And therefore, there's no main villain or any villain that could be called a main villain. There are some villains that are very prominent, there's some recurring villains, but there's no big villain at the end of the day. So a good way to look at it is that each episode is its own story.
Okay. Sounds a very interesting show. So it's like a different conflict each episode. It's not like a running on thing.
Yeah, yeah, that's
Okay.
generally how it is. Now I think there's one two-parter, but other than that, each episode is its own conflict. Now, of course, there are some recurring villains, such as Harry Mudd, who is a criminal and a businessman who tried to uh, take advantage of the crew and of some miners. And that's a bit of a detailed story that don't want to really get into straight out of the bat. And then there's the more iconic villains are the Klingons and the Romulans, a couple of alien groups who were recurring villains during the original series.
I I know some about the Klingons. All I know is, don't they have their own language? And can you speak Klingon?
I cannot speak Klingon, and yes, that is a language that was made. However, the way a lot of the Klingons are portrayed after the original series is a bit different from how they were portrayed in the original series. Because at the time of the original series, the Klingons were essentially slightly inspired by the Cold War, because the Cold
Okay.
War was going on at the time. So the Klingons were a bit like the Soviets who were trying to come in and spread their ideas and trying to take over certain areas. And of course, the Federation, which is the group that the Enterprise belongs to, is of course trying to stop them. And of course, then some conflict exists from time to time, and it's a bit of a Cold War situation.
So it's a it's like a big portrayment of the Cold War, the Klingons versus the whatever that other thing is called.
The Klingons
Yeah.
versus the Federation.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a
Okay.
Cold War parallel. Now it's not a 100% Cold War parallel, because there are differences, and especially as sequel series go to the original series, that certainly has changed. Um, with
Yeah.
especially the biggest thing that changed later on is the makeup of the Klingons, where originally it was people who had their faces painted a little bit darker and had some bushy mustaches. It later on changed to actually having uh, prosthetics so that the bone structure looked different on the forehead, and a whole different look from the original series. And but that's another story entirely.
Okay. Sounds like so the Klingons are they changed a lot through the in between the old ones and the new ones. Is that what you're trying to say there?
Yes, and
Okay.
even more recently, they changed a lot again when the new Star Trek Discovery came out. There was a big change in how the Klingon makeup was done.
Okay. So
Oh,
how long is this series?
it's only 3 seasons long, because it aired from 1966 to 1969.
So 3 seasons.
Yeah, and the third season is generally considered not to be as high quality as the first 2 seasons. And in fact, the executives were thinking of stopping the series after the second season, but so many letters came in from fans throughout the country that they decided to re initiate the series for a third season. And there are still some good episodes. It's just that overall, the episodes aren't as good regularly.
Okay. Um. So is there any like specific like really good episodes that stand out, or
Uh,
like
yeah, there are in fact some episodes that are really popular. I don't remember the names of all the episodes off the top of my head, but let me just quickly search on the internet.
yeah.
because I've got some
Um,
names floating around and I want to make sure that they're all correct. Okay. Yeah. One of the most famous ones is Mirror Mirror, where the crew, or at least three members of the crew, end up going to a parallel reality where there's another Enterprise, but in this parallel universe, the Federation is instead the Terran Empire, which is an evil empire that is trying to oppress people. And they have to figure out how to get home without being found out by their evil counterparts. And so that's an interesting story, especially since Spock has a beard in the parallel universe, which is became a meme after that.
okay. So they go to a parallel universe where they meet their counterparts, and they
Well, no,
have
they
to.
don't meet their counterparts. The ones that go to
Well,
the they
they
meet
try
the
to.
counterpart of their crew, because what actually
Yeah.
happens in the episode is that the ones that go to the parallel universe are switched. So, and the way they go is by means of a device called a transporter, which can teleport people and objects between different locations, and it had a malfunction, so instead of going to another location where it was supposed to go, it instead sent them to a parallel universe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Huh? Sounds like a good episode that's been, I guess, replicated multiple times in many other TV shows.
Yeah, I'm certain that it did bring a lot of inspiration, and that's especially true when it comes to Star Trek. Is that Star Trek as a show has inspired very many other things, including, some might argue, to some extent, it helped inspire George Lucas to begin his work on making Star Wars. But that's only one of the inspirations for George Lucas, because George Lucas, if you really analyze his work, there's very many inspirations, and Star Trek is just one of them. But another major thing that Star Trek did is that it was one of the first science fiction shows, especially a space themed science fiction show, to really become popular to the extent that it had. And therefore, it paved the way for other shows of its type to reach similar heights decades later as time passed. And in the whole process, it ended up inspiring a number of different things. And the technology that was invented by the people that made the show, not invented as in physical objects, didn't actually make transporters, but by invented, I mean the concepts for the technology that were invented and that were sometimes used from existing technology ended up also being somewhat an inspiration for other technology that exists nowadays. Now I'm not saying that it's a direct inspiration. I'm just saying that it certainly helped further people's interest in futuristic technology that was coming out at the time.
Yeah. So I know there's a lot of I know a lot of people that watch this show. My brother's one of them that watches this show, and it's, well, the newer ones. He's watched the older ones,
Yeah,
and the fan base of it, as he is, I guess, is really intense with it. I guess.
yeah, it's got a very large fan base.
Yeah.
Whole conventions.
Yeah, and I didn't know they had. Do they have like an actual convention to themselves?
Yes, I believe they
Oh,
do.
oh, I didn't know that. I
Yeah,
thought they just all went.
there's Star
I
Trek
just thought they all
conventions.
went to Comic Con.
Well, they also go to Comic Con, but I'm pretty sure that there's specific conventions specifically for Star Trek.
Oh, Sounds like it has a huge fan base.
It
Wow,
does.
I didn't know that.
It's very
I
influential, has a
I knew it was
massive fan base.
popular.
Yeah.
So you said that George Lucas had some influence off of this show. Um, so did this show influence Jar Jar Binks? Because if it did, I am not watching it.
Um I don't think there's any character that really can be considered similar to Jar Jar Binks that exists in the original series anyway. In later series, there are annoying characters sometimes, but definitely not in the original series. I can't think of any character in the original series that was consistently annoying
Okay,
or just consistently being silly.
okay. Because if there was any character like Jar Jar in there, I hardly could sit through Star Wars with him. So if there's any character like that, I would never watch that show.
Yeah.
Um, I know that Captain Kurt is the one from the original series, the one where he got the iconic way of speaking with the long pauses in between words.
That's the way he's usually portrayed. Now, having watched the series, I can say that it's not as long as some people say it is. It has been exaggerated um, as a joke, but there are situations where he does overact and does what some people call chewing the scenery. He's not literally chewing the scenery, but he just can be a bit weird sometimes, but overall, on a regular episode, it's some solid acting from William Shatner.
Okay. I didn't know if that was over exaggerated or that was how he actually talks during the show.
I think it is a little bit over exaggerated, but I can see where it's coming from, though.
Okay. Spock is one of the characters that I actually do know about, and I know he's the one that um did the whole entire live long and prosper, isn't he?
Uh,
Whole entire hand symbol thing.
yeah. Yes. In fact, the actor himself, Leonard Nimoy, was the one that came up with the hand signal for the show, and was very influential in developing the Vulcan species or the Vulcan alien type, which became very popular with fans after him.
So one question I do have: can you do the hand symbol?
Yes, I can. It's not that hard. All you have.
I I can do it. It took me a long time to figure out how to do it without my fingers dying after doing it for a few seconds.
Yeah,
Um,
I guess it just takes some practice, but I started when I was a little kid, so it's pretty easy to do nowadays.
yeah. So is there so Spock, he's a very logical character.
Yes.
So I guess you could say uh, he's the one that is he the one that asks all the questions like um that make you think, as you said in the show. How
Actually, I'd have to say that Captain Kirk does that more frequently than Spock does. Although Spock and McCoy do that as well, I think Captain Kirk is usually the one that does it the most.
okay.
But then again, William Shatner has been accused by some of stealing lines from other characters.
Oh.
That is a behind the scenes accusation that has been made.
Mm. Um so the Star Trek thing and I so you're a big fan of it, are you?
Yes. In fact, I've made several videos discussing the power scaling of various spaceships and just general power scaling concepts. But that's another story. But if you'd like, you can ask about that.
Okay. I'm gonna ask about that.
All right.
Um I'm asking about what you just said because that was a lot of words.
All right. So power scaling. First off, power scaling is when you compare two different things, or it can be more than two things, and you put them on a scale of how powerful they are in a certain context. For example, let's say you take 10 boxers and then you put them all on a scale on how hard they can hit. That's one way to put that. Another way to do it when we're talking about Star Trek is we take a bunch of different spaceships and we say which spaceship would do better in a space battle, and we then rank them as to which one does better. And that's something I've been doing. And I'm not the only one doing these things. Uh, there's other individuals who do it for different in different contexts. For example, some people do it for Dragon Ball, some people do it for Star Wars. When it comes to Star Trek, the general scale when it comes to certain types of spaceships is relatively intuitive, but sometimes it can get a bit complicated, especially when it comes to the fact that oftentimes the plot of an episode might require the characters to overcome a significantly more dangerous threat, and therefore there may be a significantly more dangerous enemy being defeated by a significantly weaker main cast. And so that complicates matters when doing power scaling. Are there other questions you have about that?
So power scaling is like ranking the power of the characters.
It can be anything, really. I have a
Yeah.
great video about the basics of power scaling. If people want to watch that, I might link that. But essentially, you're taking multiple things. It can be characters, it can be the spaceships, it can be specific weapons, it can be entire countries, and it doesn't have to be fictional. You can even do that in real life when you talk about which country would win in a war against which, and you just rank them according to which one is better in a certain category.
Okay. Um, Before we started recording, I looked at your channel and you did Star Trek versus Star Wars.
Yes, I was doing some preliminary
Awesome.
ideas for the
Yeah.
power scaling of that.
So that's the power scaling video you were talking about?
No, that's not the one I
Okay.
was talking about. I've made several videos. There's a whole playlist of them called
Oh,
Science Fiction Power Scaling, so people can check that out. And I've made a ton of different videos discussing the power scaling of various spaceships in specifically in Star Trek, since I've watched more Star Trek than I've watched some other shows. But I do know a few things about other shows as well. I've watched a number of other shows.
oh. So, so, um, there's a lot of questions. Your opinion on Star Trek, I would say, is really high, I guess. You,
Yes.
okay, so you like the Star Trek. What about the new Star Treks? What are your opinion
Um,
on those?
I haven't watched a lot of that, and the reason I haven't is because it's on a paid streaming service, which means that I'd have to pay for an entire service in order to be able to watch that regularly, and that's not something I'm willing to do specifically. But I have seen reviews of others, and overall, when it comes to the new series, the Star Trek Discovery, the way it's going, I think it's different, which isn't necessarily good. It's not necessarily bad. I just think it's different in the way it approaches science fiction and the way it approaches the idea of Star Trek. And I'm interested to see how it turns out. And at the end, maybe when it gets off of a streaming service, maybe if it gets syndication, I'll watch through it, or maybe I'll buy the DVD when that comes out, and I'll see how it is. But right now, I can't really offer any detailed review of that since I haven't really watched much of it.
So you've watched the whole series of the old Star Trek.
Yes, to be specific, um, I've watched the original pilot from 1965, and I've watched the original series, and I have also watched the entirety of the sequel, 7 season long series, The Next Generation. I've watched uh, Star Trek Deep Space Nine, which I would say is my favorite Star Trek series. I've also watched Star Trek Voyager. I've seen a little bit of Star Trek Enterprise, which was a series that was coming out in the early 2000s. And I've watched all of the Star Trek movies.
Okay. So would you say that Star Trek is a TV show that you could sit down and watch for a long time, or would you have to take breaks in between?
Well, with Star Trek, I would say that it can go either way because since it's very episodic, it means that you won't really be on a cliffhanger situation most of the time. So it's not something that you necessarily have to watch in a long time or a short time. Overall, I have watched multiple episodes back to back, and I say it can be pretty interesting. It all depends on your taste, really. So overall, as when it comes to giving it a score, let's say on a 5 point scale, I give it a 3.5 out of 5, which is very good. But the reason I give it so low is because I've seen other sequel series which I think are a bit of better quality and more interesting. Not that's, but it's still a 3.5 out of 5, which means it's still pretty good and it's still some very classical television, highly influential in not only science fiction but culture in general. So I definitely say if you haven't watched it, it definitely is worth a watch.
Okay. Sounds like a really good TV show from what you've said. And I get it, you could really drag this into just talking about Star Trek, the whole thing, couldn't you?
Yes, I could. It's fine if you want to.
Um, so Star Trek in the whole thing, would you recommend watching all of it or
Well,
watching the series and then going from there? Or could I
well,
just start at some random point?
in my opinion, I would say that there is a lot of Star Trek that is very good, especially when you go with Star Trek The Next Generation has some really amazing episodes. But there's also a few bad episodes here and there as well. Some series have more than others. Some series have more good episodes than others because, of course, being a series, there's obviously going to be a difference between the quality of every episode. So, on the whole, I would say if you were to watch Star Trek, limiting yourself to watching any one series really isn't worthwhile since there's so much good content out there. I would say that a good starting point would be either watching the original series or watching Star Trek The Next Generation. Either one of those is a very good way to jump into watching Star Trek. Watching Star Trek Voyager or Star Trek Deep Space Nine or Star Trek Enterprise or Star Trek Discovery is, I don't think, the best way to start since, especially when we're talking about Deep Space Nine and Voyager, they're technically speaking, Deep Space Nine is a spin off of The Next Generation, and Voyager is a sequel series uh, to The Next Generation. So it's not a good starting point since there's already a lot of established characters, established plot, and things that happen aren't necessarily explained because they've already been explained previously. So I think starting at either the original series or starting at The Next Generation is a good place to start.
Okay. Um, is there any with a lot of TV shows? There's a lot of lore, I would say, or fan theories about it. Is there any like really big ones about Star Trek?
When it comes to lore, I would say Star Trek has some really big lore, and in fact, there's two or three different continuities when it comes to Star Trek. There's the Star Trek which started in the cage and went all the way through the original series, the Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager, as well as Enterprise, where that's really a big continuity where the creators try to keep everything consistent in there, although they didn't always succeed. There's always some continuity error here or there. There's also and it also extends to the movies that came out during that time as well, from the first Star Trek movie, which is the motion picture, to Star Trek 10, which is Nemesis. And that's all a big continuity and the animated series is sort of halfway in there. It can be considered by some, not by others. It really depends on who you ask. Now, there's also the reboot movie continuity, starting with the 2009 Star Trek movie, which goes through the three recent Star Trek movies that were made, which were largely worked on by J.J. Abrams. And finally, there's Star Trek Discovery, where people are debating on whether or not it's considered part of the Star Trek continuity, because Discovery is people were saying that it's supposed to be part of the original continuity, but the style of it is so different that people are wondering whether or not it really should be considered. So that's right now is up in the air as to whether or not that can be considered part of the continuity. So there's a lot of theories about that. Now, when it comes to other theories about Star Trek, um, uh, one popular theory that some people have is that the Federation is actually communist or socialist anyway, which is based on a number of different things that you'd really have to know a lot about Star Trek to even discuss, really. And there's also theories as to the origin of the Borg, which are a major villain that's introduced, a major villain species which is introduced in Star Trek The Next Generation, and as to whether or not they were created by V'ger, which is a large space probe in Star Trek The Motion Picture, or whether they were created by people traveling back in time, or how the Borg generally came to be. That's a big debate. And another one where there were theories for a long time was the makeup change of the Klingons from the original series to the motion picture, because that's when the Klingon makeup began to include cranial ridges on it, so the shape of the skull is different from that point. So people were wondering what some theories were regarding that. And those theories generally died down a bit after a number of decades. Finally, in Star Trek Enterprise, there was an episode that tried to explain that.
Okay. So there's some theories about it, but I guess uh, I guess it would say the same with this series. With a lot of other series, there's a lot of fans that like to look at episodes and take them as non-canon. Is there any Star Trek episodes that you would consider non-canon?
When it comes to the original series, um, I would say that every episode is canon. I can't really think of any reason to consider a specific episode of the original series to be non-canon. Now, I think there's one episode that some people consider to be non-canon. I don't remember which one it is, but And when it actually comes to the pilot episode that was created in 1965, that one is actually also considered canon because it's actually referenced in the original series. So, generally speaking, everything that all of the live action series are canon. Um, and the animated series, there's debate as to whether or not a couple episodes of that should be considered canon or whether the whole series should be not considered canon at all. Some people like to consider it canon, and I haven't really watched that much of the animated series, so I'm not really one to make a decision on that. But when it comes to books people have written and comic books, because there are a lot of novels, I've in fact got a few here with me. There's some Dominion War novels, but there's a lot of novels that have been written about Star Trek over the years, expanding on the characters and stories. And there's also comic books, and there's also a lot of fan art and fan work. Some of the expanded universe stuff is licensed, but others are unlicensed. However, generally speaking, when it comes to actual official canon, it's only what happens on a live action show or movie. That's generally the agreement when it comes to Star Trek canon. Now, of course, other series have different conceptions of what is considered canon, but when it comes to Star Trek, it's live action, TV, and movies.
Okay. So you seem to know a lot about this show. On a scale of 1 to 10, like how much would you say you know? Like 10 being very high and 0 being me.
All right. I would say that I'm maybe on a 7 on that scale because I know a lot about certain things, but I'm not really someone that spends his time uh, researching all the behind the scenes and who's which actor and what were the producers doing and all that sort of things. I mostly know things about in universe canon uh, because it is something that I do for power scaling, and also because I find it's interesting what has been made. But generally, I would say I'm not a full on high level know it all, but when it comes to me versus the average person, I would say that maybe you could consider me an expert. But so, what do you
Okay.
think? Are you an expert on Star Wars?
No.
No.
I I'm a little bit above average, you could say, but no, I'm not an expert. As I'm not as knowledgeable in Star Wars as you are in Star Trek. As you can see my Discord name, you could understand why.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah,
It's a bit of a meme,
but
isn't it?
oh yeah,
For those of you who don't know what he's talking about, it's his Discord name is. Do you mind if I say it?
yeah, you can say it.
Okay, R2D2 from Star Trek, and the profile picture is a Dalek, which is from Doctor Who, of course.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
it tends to get a reaction out of people. I've had some pretty weird names on this site, but that one gets the most reaction out of people. Um, you're not pretty knowledgeable in this show, so is there any other shows that you are like as enthusiastic about?
well, there's a number of other science fiction shows which I do enjoy a lot. I've watched a lot of Babylon 5. I've watched a series more than once. In fact, all these series I'm talking about, I've watched multiple times. But Babylon 5, very entertaining. I don't want to get too deep into it right now because it would be going a bit off topic. I have watched all of the Star Wars movies. I've even watched the holiday special.
That's a good one. That
Yeah,
oh,
yeah. Don't tell George Lucas I've watched that one.
they might come after you.
No, he wouldn't. He's not. He's a nice guy. George Lucas is a nice guy. Um, I've I'm saying that as if I somehow know him personally, which I don't. But no, I've watched the original Battlestar Galactica series, the one that was, I think it was $1 million per episode or something like that. The most expensive show on television. Um,
Okay. Wow,
I've
that's a
Yeah, I've also watched. I've watched. What's it called again? I've watched Earth 2, which is a little known science fiction series that I think it only had 2 seasons. And it certainly had a lower production value than other series, but a lot of the characters were very good on Earth 2. So I think that's one that's recommended. In fact, when it comes to YouTube and Earth 2, I think there's only a handful of videos that exist about it on YouTube. So that definitely is very niche when it comes to science fiction.
okay. So Star Trek, very interesting show about a captain and his crew going around the galaxy trying to explore things,
Yep.
and some aliens don't like that.
Yeah, some of them don't. Some of them are friendly. Also, another thing I've watched now that I remember. In fact, I don't know why I didn't reach this off the top of my head because it is something I like very much. Is Stargate. I've watched.
I've
Oh,
I've
you've
heard the
seen it?
name. I've never watched the show.
Yeah, I've watched all of the Stargate movies, including the original one, and I've also watched Stargate SG-1, which is the main series, which ran for 10 seasons, which is pretty long for a science fiction show, except when we're talking about Doctor Who, because that one's really long. I've also watched
Yeah.
Stargate Atlantis, and I think they're both pretty good as well.
So you really like the science fiction?
Yeah, and I think another one I really like is Legend of the Galactic Heroes, but that's not a live action series. That's an animated series from Japan, but it's pretty good as well.
Yeah.
I've watched a lot of science fiction anime as well.
By scientific anime,
Science
um,
fiction, sorry.
science fiction, you mean shows like Cowboy Bebop or something like that?
Yeah, I've watched Cowboy Bebop. Um, I've seen that. I, I've seen a lot of different science fiction. Is what I'm trying to say here.
Yeah.
Is that I ran out of live action series in my immediate vicinity, so I started watching animated series as well. And there's some pretty good ones. There's some that are a bit trashy. Some are pretty good. Um, and if somebody wants to know which ones I've watched, you can look at my account on my anime list, and you can see the 100 whatever something series that I've watched.
Sounds like you've been spending some time watching some sci- science fiction.
Science
Sorry.
fiction, yeah.
Yeah. Sounds like you've been spending a lot of time watching those for a
Oh yeah,
while.
definitely. I love science fiction. It's a great way to explore interesting concepts, um, and a good way to do social commentary. Uh, that's what I think anyway.
Yeah.
And sometimes it has great plot.
Yeah, from what I've heard, that science fiction can get crazy
Yeah,
since it doesn't really have anything holding it back from what it can do.
yeah.
As-
There's so many possibilities.
So, would you recommend watching Star Trek?
Yes, I definitely would. Star Trek, the original series, is one of the most influential science fiction shows in the history of science fiction, and certainly is very culturally relevant, especially to the United States, but not just the United States. It's very popular in Europe as well. I used to live in Europe, so it's a great show overall. So what do you think? Tell me what you think.
From what I've heard from you talking, it sounds like a really interesting show that re- sounds like it could be really exciting at times, but also be really, I wouldn't say slow, but not action at points,
Well, there
I guess.
is action. There's actually
Yeah.
a lot of combat in various episodes, but it really depends on which episode you're watching, and depends on how what mood the writers were in when they made the episode.
Yeah. One last question. Is there any Star Trek that you wouldn't recommend watching?
Any that I would not recommend watching.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, if you're not a fan of Star Trek, I would say the you should not watch. Now, I'm gonna get in a lot of trouble when I talk about this, but Enterprise, Star Trek Enterprise as a series is generally a little bit lower quality than, let's say, the more popular series like The Next Generation and the original series. And so that one might be one that is more something that the fans would enjoy, and not something that someone who isn't already a fan would enjoy. And that can also be seen by the fact that it had a lower viewership than a lot of the previous series. The animated series sometimes is relatively low quality, so that's one that I would not recommend watching if you are not already a fan of the original series. And the three newest movies, I don't like them very much, so I personally would not recommend them as much. One of them has a bit too much lens flare in for my tastes, so I certainly would not recommend the three newest movies. And also, Star Trek Five is generally considered the worst Star Trek movie, so that one is one that would not necessarily recommend.
You said that people weren't going to like your answer. On a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you think people will? How much crap do you think you're going to get for that now?
Oh, a lot. Quite a bit. Assuming my video gets watched by a lot of people. Now, assuming that I have my regular viewership amounts, I'm going to say not much. But if this video becomes viral, and then I'll have someone in the comments saying you don't know what you're talking about. William Shatner is a great director. Star Trek Five is the
Wait,
best Star Trek movie ever made, and
he
I'd say
directed Star Trek 5.
yeah,
Oh.
and he didn't do too good of a job at it, and that's why it's generally and it's I don't know if it's exactly his fault that it didn't do as well. It could be also issues with budgeting, but generally speaking, Star Trek Five has a lot of issues. So I put that in a box. And then there's a lot of people that are fans of Enterprise as a series that will say, "How could you not recommend Enterprise? What is wrong with you?" And I'd say I just don't like it as much, folks. Okay, it's and of course all of the newest fans who love the J.J. Abrams Trek, who don't know anything about the old-fashioned, old-timey, old philosophical talk, and are all about the action, 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 constant action, lens flare in your face. Call him J.J. Abrams, call him whatever you want. Those people, I don't know about those people. They're not going to be happy with what I had to say, but you know what? I respect them. I respect their opinion. I know why they like it. I don't like it for the reason that they like it, and I'll leave it at that. So, what do you think?
Um, from what you've talked about, maybe the problem with the fifth one was he didn't have a dramatic actor to act as dramatic as he did. Maybe that was the
Well, he
problem.
was an actor in it, so
Oh, he acted in it.
yeah,
Okay. Well, he doesn't have that excuse now.
yeah. He he was both the director and and the male lead, I would say.
Wait, he played
He played him.
Captain
He
Kirk.
played Captain Kirk. Yeah,
Okay, well, he doesn't have that excuse anymore. Maybe it was just a
yeah.
bad movie.
And then two movies later, he had a bridge dropped on him, and that's the end of Captain Kirk. Spoiler alert.
Well, wait, he's dead now? Captain Kirk?
Yeah, Captain Kirk is
Oh.
dead. Uh, the actor is still alive, but Captain Kirk as a character is dead.
Oh, okay.
and
Wow.
and that's why
I
a lot
wasn't
of people
expecting
don't
that.
like the movie Star Trek Generations. And to be honest, it's not the greatest Star Trek movie either. Maybe I shouldn't recommend that one either. But I do think it is more recommendable than Star Trek 5, and also more recommendable than Star Trek 11, 12, and 13.
Oh. Well, I wasn't expecting him to die so early. I guess you could say.
Yeah,
Wow.
it
Well,
happens. I mean, you're going to die someday. I'm going to die. Everybody watching
well,
this, you're probably going to die someday. Get used to it.
well, maybe not. Maybe, hey,
Maybe what? What?
maybe not.
Maybe not? You think they're
Maybe
gonna
we,
cure
maybe we
aging?
can,
You think
maybe we can get that technology.
you think the technology exists? What is this? What is this? They didn't
Hey,
even have
they
that technology in Star Trek.
what is that one movie with all the Jim Henson puppets where all they have is a crystal and they just keep aging with that?
Oh, oh snap.
You know what I'm talking about.
Oh, um, I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, the one with the weird puppets.
I don't. I wouldn't call them weird. I like that movie.
Scary puppets. Scary puppets for small children.
I think it's The Dark Crystal, but I
It
might be
is the
wrong.
dark. Yep, that's the name. The Dark
Yeah,
Crystal.
yeah, I love that movie.
Maybe that's
Great
something we
movie.
can come up with. Just crystals that we hold in our hands and stay youthful forever.
Yeah, I don't know,
Or maybe the answer is just moving to Mars. We can just move to Mars and maybe.
man. Okay, don't get me started about Mars exploration. Okay,
Wait, do you not
let me
want
get on
that?
my soapbox here about Mars exploration. Number one, that's tax money that I'm never going to get back. Okay, that is tax money, and what are we going to do on Mars that's going to earn that money back? Nothing. Absolutely
Grow
nothing.
Mars vegetables. We can grow vegetables on Mars and say
It's
they taste
cheaper.
different.
It's cheaper and more efficient to grow all those vegetables on Earth. To do it on Mars, you'd have to
Hey,
carry all of the biomass needed for that. And
ev- eventually something's gonna happen to the Earth, and you're gonna be sad that we didn't move to Mars.
well, we don't have the technology for that. That's what I'm saying. There's no point in leaving if we don't have the technology to take advantage of it. We don't
I
have the
give it.
technology.
I'll give it a few years. Eventually, we'll get the technology.
Yeah,
Just
but
build a giant dome around and just put oxygen in there.
another thing people like talking about is they like to talk about how we're going to mine minerals on Mars and ship them back to Earth. We're going to mine iron or whatever other thing you want to mine. And to that I respond. So let's talk about the costs of mining these minerals. So you're taking, of course, the mining equipment and all of the tools needed to mine. You're going to send those up into space, which takes a lot of fuel and a lot of energy for that. And you're going to then land those spaceships on Mars, unload all that, and then you're going to fill those up with the minerals and you're going to send them back to Earth. So that's even more fuel that you need. And then you're going to land those on Earth safely, and then you're going to sell those minerals. And are you going to make a profit? No, you're not, because while you spent a couple of years doing that, within a couple of months, some random mine somewhere on Earth output 10 times that many minerals at at 100th of the cost that it took you to mine those on Mars, and therefore you're now out of business. Thanks, Elon Musk. Thanks.
You're blaming all of this on
No,
Elon
I'm
Musk
not. I'm
now?
not. I'm just memeing Elon Musk. Okay, Elon
He'll
Musk.
he'll he'll get you on Twitter. I'm telling you. He doesn't care about people's feelings. He'll get you on Twitter.
I'm just memeing Musk.
Yeah.
I'm just memeing him. Elon Musk's not serious. If you can make it work, make it work. But right now, I can't see how it's gonna work. Therefore, don't want any of my tax money to go into um, something that isn't actually going to help the country.
So so you're really against going to Mars?
Yes, I am. It because think about it. How much money is is that money well spent? Is that taxpayer money well spent going to Mars? What are we going to accomplish that we can't accomplish with sending machines there?
I guess you could say the same thing we did with the moon. I mean, what was the point of going to the moon except for to show everyone else so we could do it first?
Yeah, and that's the problem here. It's that people are so interested in the accomplishment that they actually don't realize that other than the accomplishment itself, there isn't any actual accomplishment being made. So what I think is the problem here is that instead of maybe sending all of this money to Mars, they can instead use it to actually fix infrastructure or to help mitigate the national debt or perhaps to actually implement the space force that the president was talking about.
The Space Force,
The space force, yes.
just
And
in
do you
case
know
those
what that
space
is?
aliens come down,
It
take them out real
well,
fast.
it's not really about aliens. What it is it's actually part of our Cold War Part Two, Electric Boogaloo, where
It's
we're
my favorite episode.
yeah where we're up against Russia again, and this time we need space. And so what's going to happen is that of course you would have to send up satellites, and those satellites would then be able to take out enemy satellites and perhaps shoot ground targets, although that might not be necessary, or intercept missiles, and to do a lot of hacking, some information. But actually sending people up into space, I don't think is really necessary because it's a lot more expensive than sending all these machines because you need all these different things for life support. And in the end, you don't really get any net benefit from that.
Well, all I'm saying on that is, it might be a good idea to go to Mars. We don't know. I mean, one day these volcanoes, we can't predict those. Eventually, we're gonna have technology. Eventually, we're gonna have to go to Mars or somewhere else that's like Mars or something.
Yeah, could
How do we
be,
get
but
from Star Trek to Mars? your your rant on how we shouldn't go to Mars because of taxes.
yeah, very fiscally minded. And that's just the tip of the iceberg of my political opinions. But let's
So do you
let's
just
leave
have
that
like
for
a
another time.
do you just have like a folder dedicated to why we shouldn't go to Mars?
Maybe I should. Maybe I really should. I could 95 reasons why we shouldn't go to Mars.
Next best BuzzFeed video right there. Just go work for them. The TV show real quick.
Reason 1, Elon Musk.
Just blame everything on Elon Musk and it's okay.
No, reason 2, the deficit. Reason 3, yes we can.
Yes, we can. Okay.
Reason 4, Pepe the Frog.
Well, wouldn't that be the best reason to go to Mars?
No, it's in.
We could find a new. There might be a new species. There might be like a really rare Pepe just sitting on Mars.
I don't think that's a risk I'm willing to take. That's not a meme I'm willing to invest. And if we do find the rare Pepe on Mars, then there's always a risk that someone will steal it, and
We
then
can't. That's
then
why. That's why
it'll
we're not telling Russia about when we're going to Mars, because they might get up there and steal that really rare Pepe that we're
Yeah,
going
with
to.
their Soviet era flashbulb pistols that'll blind our astronauts. That's a legit weapon.
Really?
Yeah.
Soviets are weird people, I guess. Probably shouldn't say that. It's probably
No,
not a good
I
thing to
think
say.
Soviets are fine people. It's just I didn't like their government at all.
I don't tend to like the Soviets government either. I don't
Yeah.
think anyone did.
Well, I'm sure that there are people
Well,
who did.
well, anybody in America didn't. Most people.
I don't know.
How did we get on the Soviet Union? This has gone very off topic.
Yes, it has. Maybe we should stop here.
Star Trek and the Soviet Union, they're just connected all
Oh
the
yeah,
time.
and then we go back to the fan theory that some people say that the Federation is actually communist.
Yep,
And
it's confirmed. The
confirmed.
Federation is communist
Yeah,
now.
we got it. We confirmed it. It's
And
confirmed.
we have one reason. It's because of Elon Musk. He made them the communists.
Yes.
Elon Musk is actually Captain Kirk.
The United Federation of Planets is communist because the United States is spending money to go to Mars because of Elon Musk, who's actually secretly someone who's trying to implement the Soviet Union.
He's secretly a Russian spy from the Cold War that just somehow survived this long.
Yeah, and actually distracting us from the fact that it shouldn't be a tinfoil hat that you're wearing, but instead a lead-lined hat.
Oh, lead lined. I thought we were going for a plastic wrap hat.
No, because think about it. What's tinfoil gonna stop? If you're gonna stop something, you gotta stop it with lead. I mean, what if there's an EMP, a Soviet EMP? I don't know how that could happen since the Soviet Union doesn't exist. Soviet Union detonates a nuclear bomb high in the atmosphere. EMP, all of your electrical devices are dead. Your car is dead because that's what you get for getting a car that has a computer in it, you uncultured swine.
Why do you think he's trying to give everybody self-driving cars? That way one day he can just shut everything down.
Yeah, it's a conspiracy, folks. We figured it out.
We have figured everything out, and Star Trek, the reason that they stopped doing it is because of Elon Musk.
Yeah, Elon Musk shut it down. He shut it down because he figured out that Gene Roddenberry was on him all along. Gene Roddenberry knew it. Gene Roddenberry knew it when he made all of his different science fictions, like Star Trek and Earth Final Conflict, also another series that I've watched. Gene Roddenberry's Earth Final Conflict came out after he died, but still interesting. Well, it really depends on which season you're talking about. Yeah, but still,
he knew exactly what Elon Musk was doing.
Gene Roddenberry was onto Elon Musk. Follow the breadcrumbs all the way back, and Elon Musk is actually Joseph Stalin's grandson by cloning. He's his because he's actually the son of Joseph Stalin's clone. That makes him his grandson by cloning.
Wait, this just brought into a new conspiracy theory that Joseph Stalin cloned his grandson.
No. Get this straight. Joseph Stalin cloned himself, and his clone, and he adopted his clone as his son, and then his clone had a son, and that's Elon Musk.
Oh, okay. So Elon Musk is Joseph Stalin's grandson, who is also his son.
Well,
in a weird way.
In a weird way, yes.
Okay. I feel like we have Elon Musk in a corner.
Yeah.
I'm gonna bring.
Checkmate, Elon.
At a meeting.
Your move.
He has nowhere else to go.
Yeah, we cornered him. All right, and with that, I would like to say thank you all for watching. And as I would say again, Star Trek, the original series, 3.5 out of 5, very good, would recommend. And we will be seeing you all next time on TOS over and out.